Well, it's really great to be here today, and a lot of things to talk about. I think the first thing I'm going to talk about myself before the 1947, you believe what autism was back then, and I had all the full symptoms. I speech delay, not really until age 3 and a half to 4, and I was really lucky to get into really good early educational intervention. I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting little kids in a lot of one-to-one teaching when you first see symptoms. Now, there's a big quagmire going on now about diagnosis and controversy about that. When they come out with the new diagnostic guidelines, they're planning on getting rid of Asperger's and making everything just autism spectrum disorder. And the problem you've got with this diagnosis stuff, it's not accurate. It's a behavioral profile. In fact, the American system with insurance and everything is very different, and in order to get services at home, you have to get labels to get services. I think things are a little bit different here. And I'm seeing too many situations where the kid sort of becomes the label. Parents will come to me and say, oh, is my kid autism or is Asperger's? And when they get rid of Asperger's, they're going to call that social communication disorder. And the reason for doing that is funding. Because laws have been passed in various states that they got to fund autism and Asperger's, but not social communication disorder. But it's still the same kid. Autism is a very big spectrum, and it goes from somebody's going to remain nonverbal and have to live in a supervised living situation, to Steve Jobs, who brought Apple computers, and Einstein and Mozart, and half the people that live out there in tech land. You know, you take out a few social circuits, then you get tech circuits. See, one of the problems they have in autism is it's such a big spectrum. And teachers that know how to work with some of the more severe kids don't know what to do with the smart Aspie kid. You know, geeks and nerds and Asperger's and social communication disorder are all the same thing. And the thing that's driving me crazy today on the whole employment thing is I'm seeing kids that should be getting employed. Because when I went out and worked with the meatpacking plants, the grown-up version of those kids was doing good jobs like metal fabrication, designing equipment, you know, really being a contributor. But I'm amazed at how people get so locked into the label in a way that's just really, really bad. Okay, the thing about kids on the spectrum is you gotta stretch them. You gotta push them just past their comfort level. You can't shove them into new surprises. Surprises scare. And you can't take a kid that screams every time you go to the train station and shove them into the train station. Because these sensory problems really are real. And you can't just jam them into those kind of situations. And if there's one place where research needs to be done, it is on the sensory issues. Because they can sometimes be very debilitating. When I was 15 years old, I had the opportunity to go to my aunt's ranch. And I was afraid to go. Now, Mother wasn't going to let me not go, because if I hadn't gone to my aunt's ranch, I would have never have gone into the cattle business. You know, so she says, well, you can go for a week or you can go all summer, but not going wasn't going to be an issue. You got to stretch them. Too many of these kids getting too much stuff done for them. Another thing that I was taught when I was a young child was how to take turns, and that was taught with board games. That's a perfect way to teach kids how to take turns. Now, sensory problems occur along with many, many, many disorders can have the sensory problems. And interestingly, head injuries get the same sensory problems as different developmental disorders. And sensory issues are very variable. One autistic kid may have sound sensitivity. Another one may have problems with fluorescent lights. It can be extremely variable, from just a mild nuisance to totally debilitating. When I was a little kid, loud sounds hurt my ears. And I hated balloons when I was a kid because I was afraid they'd pop and then scare me. And one of the best ways to teach kids to tolerate sounds is let the child control how much sound he has to tolerate. You know, let's say he can't tolerate going into Tesco's. Well, let him control how much Tesco he's going to have to tolerate. Then he can give a signal and you'll take him out. But you always want to encourage him to tolerate a bit more. What could have been done with my balloon popping phobia? Well, let's blow it up really little, and then I pop it with a pin. It doesn't make any sound when it's little. Then gradually make it bigger. Or put the dreaded fire alarm on a recording device, and the child gradually increases the volume. You've got, but the child needs to initiate the dreaded sounds. Now, when I was a little kid, back in 1949, they were only able to do 2 tests on me. They did an EEG to make sure I didn't have epilepsy, and they checked to make sure I wasn't deaf. And I was not deaf. But you can pass a hearing test, but that tells you nothing about auditory detail. That's the ability to hear hard consonant sounds. Some individuals just hear the vowel sounds. They hear like, wah, 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 wah. In fact, when I was young, I thought grown-ups had their own foreign language. I thought grown-ups had their own language. And, because when people spoke slowly to me, I understood. But when they spoke fast, I did not understand. So slow down, enunciate the words, go more slowly. Some individuals, their hearing is like a bad mobile phone, fading in and out. You're driving along and the phone is getting worse and then it gets better. And you can get these auditory problems with many, many disorders. Now, there's kind of 2 kinds of problems with speech. I had problems with getting my speech out. It was like I was really stressed, like I'd say, bah, the ball. Couldn't get my words out. Other kids are echolalic, where they're yakking out all these TV commercials, but they don't know what they mean. You see, that's a totally different kind of language problem. And echolalia tends to worsen as receptive language gets worse. But you see, one situation is a language output problem, another it's a language meaning problem. And then they might start singing a commercial for a food company when they're hungry because they're realizing that that has a connection with food. Now, with many different developmental disorders, many different labels, you have attention shifting slowness. The processing speed of the brain is slowed way down. It just takes much longer to shift back and forth between 2 different things. You can sometimes get a phenomena called clipping, where maybe the kid doesn't even hear the first half of a sentence. So if I said to him, hang your coat up on the rack, maybe all he hears is rack. So then what you want to do is say, Tommy, I need to ask you to do something. Hang your coat up on the rack. See, then you get rid of the clipping problem. Now this picture really shows clearly attention shifting slowness problems. This research was done probably about 10 years ago, and they had people on the spectrum watching a really social movie, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? That's the kind of movie I find boring. When I was on the plane, I watched Men in Black. Well, that's such a funny movie. I really like the idea that New York City is really filled up full of aliens just disguised as weird New Yorkers. This is such a funny idea. And when they had the people watching this movie, they had electronic gizmos on them where they could see where they were watching. And the normal person looks at the eyes, and the autistic doesn't look at the eyes. But the article failed to mention the attention shifting slowness. Look at how many times the yellow line looks back and forth compared to the red line. You see, that's processing speed of the brain. Now, another problem you can get that's a sensory problem is image pixelation. I'm sure you have all had your nice widescreen TV get all pixelated when the satellite dish is getting rain on it and it's shaking and it's doing all those kind of things. Well, you can get a similar problem in the visual cortex. Your eyes are fine, but back here in the visual cortex, that's where the brain assembles the image. And there's circuits back there for shape, color, and motion, and texture. Scientists know where they're located, and when they're damaged, it does all kinds of weird things to your vision. They don't really know how they work, though. They just know where they're located, and when you break them, you get awful stuff like stop-motion coffee pouring and pixelating images. This is also similar to what people have when they have migraines. And I'm finding 1 student out of 50, the normal students in my livestock handling class, have this problem. And they cannot do my drawing assignment. That's how I know they have the problem. These students absolutely cannot draw. Now, what are signs that there's something wrong with the visual system? First of all, the eye exam may be normal, because the problem's back here. These are the kids that do a lot of finger flipping. They tend to look out the corner of their eye. They tilt their head. These are the kids that often hate escalators. And they hate escalators because they can't figure out when to get on and off the escalator. But the big bad thing is fluorescent lights, 50-cycle fluorescent lights. They can see that flicker.
So the whole room is flashing on and off like a strobe light. It'd be pretty hard to pay attention in school if it was flashing on and off like a strobe light. I had a dyslexic student that had this problem, and she could just get spaced out when she was exposed to fluorescent lights. You know, if there's one thing environmentally I could change in the schools, it'd be to get rid of 50-cycle fluorescent lights. So what do we do about energy saving? Well, you have to go to electronic 400 to 500 cycle fluorescent lights. But these are really real problems. I don't know why it's taken people so long to recognize the sensory processing problems, because they are real. Some of these other labels I think are rubbish. Oppositional defiant disorder. You know, in America we used to call those juvenile delinquents. You know, I'm trained as a hardcore biologist. I'm an animal scientist. I'm trained as a biology person. I took neuroscience classes. I'm going to show you what they found inside my brain. It's very, very interesting. Now, when some kids go to read, the print will jiggle on the page. So I'd ask the students that I thought had this problem, you see the print jiggle on the page. Do fluorescent lights bother you? Do you hate escalators? And do you hate driving at night? Yes. And this problem can vary from very slight to where it just causes eye strain. They're so bad that the child cannot read and he's going to flunk out of school. He's going to just fail. Now, here are some simple things you can do for the visual processing problem. Go out and get an old-fashioned energy waster light bulb. I don't know if you can buy those here at home. We can still buy those. But if you can get those, or maybe you order them online or something, you put one of those next to your kid's desk, because that will blot out the flicker. The old-fashioned hot light bulbs don't flicker. Try wearing a hat. Now, there's only two kinds of computers that absolutely do not flicker: tablets and laptops. If my dyslexic student hadn't had her laptop, she would have failed her graduate studies. Tablets and laptops. That's what you need to be using. TV types of computers are horrid. These right here are probably pretty bad. They probably have fluorescent light hiding inside there. So they're not as bad as the TVs, but they're still pretty bad. And then try putting the students' work on pastel paper. Try like gray paper, tan paper, light blue paper, all the different pastel papers. Because when you get just the right color background, they can read it better. Experiment with colored backgrounds on the computer and different fonts. And some people are helped by the Irwin colored lenses. But if you have 20 individuals with autism, those glasses are only going to help maybe 2 of them. But they're going to really help that 2 of them. You know, you try to study colored glasses across the whole spectrum, no, you're not going to find any results. And I've sent students off sunglass shopping, and they've come back with some light blue glasses or some light pink glasses, and they're going, oh, I got an A on my economics quiz because now I can actually see. And I talked to one mom. She had a little partially verbal, like 7-year-old, and this girl could only tolerate maybe 5 minutes at a great big huge supermarket. And after she got her pink Disneyland glasses that they bought for $6.95 in American dollars, she could do an hour of shopping. Well, that's real significant. Now let's look at some of the other extreme sensory problems. One of the problems when a person has very extreme sensory problems, and a lot of people remain nonverbal, it takes extreme effort to screen out the background noise. And they often will need breaks in order to calm down. One of the reasons why they stim is they do it to calm down. Now the problem is if you let them do it all the time, the brain's not going to develop. But there's some individuals who will need to have some breaks doing that so that they can screen out background noise. Some of them are mono-channel. They either got to look at something or they got to hear it. They can't do both at the same time. Also, individuals on the spectrum have described body boundary issues. And people that have very, very severe sensory problems are often not a visual thinker. They often are auditory. In other words, auditory is their best sense, where for me, vision is my best sense for learning. Now, here are 2 books that ought to be on every book table, and the thing that drives me crazy is they're not on the book tables. I think normal people have a hard time understanding just how important sensory issues are. And both of these books have a writing in there from individuals that are nonverbal that type independently, and they type totally independently. And they describe their sensory problems. Like Tito describes how things are just a jumble, almost like a kaleidoscope. He describes how when he had to learn how to put on a t-shirt, it had to be put on very slowly, because if the shirt was put on fast, he couldn't figure out how his arms went out through the sleeves. And Carly discusses problems with screening out background noise. That when she was in a coffee shop, she could screen out the noise of the dishes and the noise of the coffee pot and things like that. But then when a lady walked by full of perfume, it was sort of like busting open a floodgate. Then all of the other stimulation of the coffee shop just poured in, and she just went into shutdown. That's what happens when a person goes into sensory shutdown. And I think researchers need to be paying a lot more attention to these first-hand accounts of these sensory problems. And if you're working with people that are nonverbal, these two books up here are required reading as far as I'm concerned. And you can buy them on the US, Amazon.com, no problem. Okay, scientists have learned a lot. Sensory problems are real. There tends to be abnormal circuits between different brain regions. See, in your brain, you got your gray matter, that's all the wrinkly stuff that you think with, but then the other part of your brain is your white matter. That's the inner office connections that connect up all the different parts of the brain. Half your brain is inter-office connections. That's where abnormalities are in a developmental disorder. And in a head injury, the abnormality is caused by ripping those white matter circuits. Sensory problems are extremely variable, and the back of the brain tends to be used a whole lot more than the front of the brain. These are things that have been, showing up in study after study after study. And I have found, personally for myself, in getting insight into myself, the most valuable stuff for me was the first-person accounts from other people on the spectrum and the brain research. Those are the two things that gave me the most insight. And then, a lot of the brain research on the social problems. Face recognition, that's still a problem for me today. You see, when you hear a word, you see a word, you speak a word, or you think about a word, different parts of the brain turn on. Well, you got to have your inter-office communications. Now, this is kind of a map of the motorways, of the main motorways of the brain. Now, I'm going to have to use a US map because that's this is the way I visualize it. Sort of visualize this as a map of the United States. And on the East Coast, on this side, you got Washington, D.C. and New York. In the middle of the country there, you got Chicago. That's the emotion center. And then out on the West Coast, of course, is Silicon Valley. You got Microsoft, and you got Google and Apple and all those kind of companies out there in Silicon Valley. And what happens in the autism spectrum is there's a lot of motorways that don't get built on the East Coast. There's also motorways that don't get built to Chicago. So then you lose what's called top-down control on emotions. That's what causes things like temper tantrums. You have a harder time controlling it. And the way I got over my temper tantrums is I switched from anger to crying. Yeah, you still have a job if you're crying. But what happens on the West Coast is you may build extra motorways. Out there in Silicon Valley, you see building more freeways back there on the back of the brain. That may account for a lot of the savant skills. Okay, all we got right there, that's an MRI through my head right there. And you can see there's a big, okay, this is what the National Institute of Health calls the connectome. This is all the white matter circuits in my brain that connect up every other department. You see what a big part of the brain that is. This is done on a state-of-the-art scanner by Walter Schneider at the University of Pittsburgh. There's only one scanner like this in the entire world. It was funded by our Defense Department in order to scan head injuries in veterans, where you see big masses of ripped up circuits. And it actually can track every one of these little tiny fibers. See, if you put this mouse right here, see that little tiny fiber there? That's a piece there of a big long axon. It can actually track these all the way through here. They can take the circuits apart with this thing. And they've got, I don't know, like 25 supercomputers in a box that'll fit underneath the desk. Some Asperger person had to do that. And it was very, very interesting finding out some of the things. I found out I have extra circuits back here because I've always talked about bottom-up thinking and my mind working like a search engine on the internet. Well, they found the search engine. There's just a picture of the connectome without without the rest of my head there. Okay, now there is a normal control language output circuit. See, they can dissect this. They can actually do white matter dissection on this scanner in a live person. So I'm still here. And if you were to look at this in a formalin-fixed brain, it looks like little tiny, tiny white threads. This scanner, I don't have any idea how it works. It's like magic. But it can track these things. That's my language output circuit. Now, these circuits tend to grow from the back of the brain to the front. The back of the brain matures earlier. But as it grew towards the front, it couldn't get where it was going, so then it just made a whole lot of little exit ramps going off the motorway, like I've got language output stuff in my motor cortex. And maybe that explains why I'm not very coordinated. Okay, now look at the output end of that circuit. This is speak what I see. There's a lot more fibers on the normal person, you know, in terms of amount of fiber area or bandwidth that you get in the normal person compared to mine. And this explains why I had trouble getting my speech out. Now, someday in the future, this scanner will be available for, I don't know, in the local hospital. It's not yet. Now, the thing that's nice is the magnet you have in a local hospital will probably still work. It's having to get all the computer stuff to go with it. Okay, now then they did another scan on my auditory circuit, and you can see there I got a little teeny hear sounds. This is why visual person, you know, speak what I hear. Got this wimpy little circuit compared to the big one. You know, look at this stuff, and I go, you know, this is the way diagnosis ought to be done. Now, there's some evidence that visual thinking is obscured by language, because in certain type of Alzheimer's, as you destroy visual thinking, art ability comes out. Now, the thing that's been really interesting about my brain scans is things that have been found in my brain matched up with clinical things. Okay, they found out why I had a speech output problem. I'm going to show you another scan later on, big visual circuit. They found out that my fear center was 3 times larger than normal. But that's not true in everybody with autism. It's mainly true in us visual thinkers. Boy, the non-autistic ones are pretty nervous too, anxious. I can't emphasize enough the importance of developing the kid's area of strength. I was good at art. This is a picture that a little 9-year-old did in perspective. Build on the area of strength. We need to be thinking a lot more about what is this kid going to do when he grows up. Visual thinkers like me, we're going to be good at things like graphic design, photography, industrial design. That's the kind of stuff we'd be good at doing. And my ability in art was always encouraged. But like a lot of little autistic kids, all I wanted to do was do horse head drawings. Well, I was encouraged to draw more than horse heads. You got to broaden it out. If the kid likes trains, let's do a picture of the train station. Let's read about the history of the railroad. Let's calculate how long it takes a train to get from one place to another. You know, you want to like tune into those fixations and then broaden it out. Use the fixation to motivate. Now, I think completely in pictures, and a young man sent me this picture to show how he has movies in his head. And the HBO movie did a great job of showing how I think. And the HBO movie is available here in an edition that will play on DVD players here. Like if you buy it from Amazon in the US, you'll have to play it on a computer because the US is region 1. You set your computer for region 1. But there is a way to get one here that will play for your region. And right over there, Kate and Jude, they know how to order that. There's 9 left. I'd like to see them get ordered. And because one thing I really liked about the movie is it showed exactly how my visual thinking worked. It showed autism very, very accurately. It showed all the things I had built. You know, of course, the nerd side of me really, really likes that. Now, being a visual thinker really helped in my equipment design because I could test run a piece of equipment in my mind. I didn't know that other people couldn't do this. I thought everybody could test run equipment in their mind. I didn't know it was a special skill. And that's one of my cattle handling facilities. In fact, half the cattle in the US are handled in equipment I designed for large meat plants. I think that's doing pretty good for somebody that thought was mentally retarded and wasn't going to amount to anything. And there is the facility that they recreated for the HBO movie. Now that was really super cool. Now how did I get my business started? I got it started one little freelance project at a time. You see, when you're a nerd and when you're really weird, one thing I learned is you have to sell your work, not yourself. And so I just show off my drawings. I got to see if this projector is doing my drawings justice. No, it's not. This is a really bad projector. But when I would go to an ag engineering meeting and I'd whip out one of my drawings, they'd go, "Oh, you did that?" They just couldn't believe it that I did that. I had to sell my work. You know, if you're a mathematician, then you show off your computer programming and things like that you've done. The emphasis needs to be on selling your work rather than yourself. And we need to start figuring out how to get the back doors to employment. And we need to be doing a whole lot more on when kids are in middle school, thinking about what are they going to do when they grow up. By the time kids are in middle school, which for us would be like 13, 14 years old, they need to be doing jobs outside the home, like paper routes and things like that, because we're just babying and kind of coddling these kids too much. Need to be stretching them. They got to learn how to do stuff for themselves. But again, no surprises. Like I knew about the ranch trip 3 months in advance. You don't do surprises. But on the other hand, you don't be coddling them. And there's another view of the dipping vat drawing. Now, how do you form a concept when I have all of these very, very specific pictures in my mind? The way I form a concept is you sort individual pictures into categories. And this young man, in a book called Little Rain Men by Karen Simmons, is a great book for little kids. You know, you have to buy it from Amazon, probably U.S. Amazon. And what this little boy is doing here is he's sorting cats and dogs into different boxes in his brain. See, this is what's called bottom-up thinking. You're sorting information into boxes. Specific examples are put in file folders to form concepts. Now, I realized my thinking was different when I asked people about church steeples. I said, think about a church steeple. How does it come into your mind? And I was shocked to find out that most people get this vague, generalized steeple. I only see specific ones. There is no vague, generalized steeple. And they come into my mind like Google for images. Well, there's childhood ones. How about ones in Fort Collins where I live? How about famous ones in the U.S.? They just come up as a series of pictures and other famous ones. You know, it's all specific. You see, then I could sort these into like childhood ones, Fort Collins where I live, famous steeples in the U.S., famous ones in Europe. You see, you can sort, you can put them all in the big steeple file folder, but then you can have subcategories in there of, you know, from different places or different types. How about chapels versus cathedrals? I could sort them that way. You see, it's bottom up. Categories are the beginning of concept formation. Everything's learned by specific example. Like, for example, if you want to teach a kid not to run across the street, you better teach it in 7 or 8 different places. If you don't teach it in 7 or 8 different places, they don't get the concept. Now, I used to joke around that I had a huge internet connection deep into my brain for visual thinking. Yes, I do. You see how the red line goes all the way back to the visual cortex? See, visual cortex is back here. Now, another thing that I have that showed up on this fancy Defense Department scanner is in here. I got extra circuits right in here. Most people have these cross circuits up here in the front. Nope, I got them in the back, right smack in the graphics department. And basically, I call them my parietal bushes. Because that's the parietal cortex area. I think they have some other name other than that, but my parietal bushes are what enabled me to have such a good search engine in my mind. So then we take another slice up there, and I got a big one there. And you'll see up there in the front of the brain, the top, how it's got a giant bush coming out. Those are shunt circuits. In other words, where does brain plasticity happen? You're not going to grow big axons all the way across the whole brain. Those fibers they're single nerve fibers, like in cable bundles. You know, the plasticity is going to be out there on the ends where it's interacting with the gray matter. And that's probably weird shunt circuits that developed with all the early intervention. I can't wait until someday in the future where they can really the diagnosis based on what's in the brain. And the thing you're going to find is all this stuff's going to be on a continuum. Because I've often wondered, what would be a normal brain? What would a normal brain actually look like? I question that there is such a thing. I really question that. Now, let's just show, this was done in another lab at the University of Utah, Jason Cooper Ryder. And what the blue thing is, it's the fluid-filled ventricles. And on the left-hand side, the fluid-filled ventricles going right through the math department and working memory. I have an absolutely awful working memory. Now, the thing is that for the kinds of work that I did on design, you don't need working memory. But as soon as I have to do math problems where you put a load on working memory, I'm just hopeless, absolutely hopeless. Tests like the block design, aced it, got them all right. Raven's progressive colored matrices, got them all right. Estimating the angles of lines, got that all correct. The coding test failed that, and too much load on working memory. See, what we got to do is build up on the area where there's ability. Now, this is probably one of the most important slides I got. There's kind of three basic kind of autistic minds. There's the photorealistic visual thinker like me that absolutely cannot do algebra. These kids need to go right to geometry and trig. You know, just jump them to geometry and trig. Then you've got the mathematics mind, the pattern thinker. This is the kid that when he's 7 or 8 years old, maybe he's a little math genius that needs to get upper level math books, but he's going to have trouble with reading. This is kind of the pattern. And then you got the verbal facts guy. This is the guy that loves history and they know everything about their favorite subject. And some individuals are auditory thinkers, and you can get mixtures of these different kinds of thinking. In fact, there's actual research that shows between the photorealistic visual thinker and the pattern thinker in populations of engineers and artists, these methods of thinking have been confirmed with PET scans. In fact, I'm working on another book right now on cognition. And I find this just really interesting, and I think all that happens in something like autism is you just get more extreme versions of this. And we got to start thinking about jobs for the different kinds of minds. I talked to one parent who had an 8-year-old that's really good at math. I said, why don't you let him start learning some computer programming? Just to show you there's two ways to do this algebra problem. You can do it verbally, or you can do it more visually spatial. See, I think in photorealistic pictures, but another kind of mind, the mathematician's mind, is the pattern thinker. This is not my mind. That praying mantis is made with one sheet of folded paper. And there was no cutting and no taping. And what you see in the background, that's the folding pattern for making the praying mantis. It's definitely not my mind. There's no way I could possibly do this. Now, one bad thing that's happened at schools at home is they've taken out a lot of the hands-on classes, things like art, wood shop, metalworking, cooking classes, you know, just to concentrate on academics. And I think that's a real mistake. First of all, these classes teach practical problem solving. Now, the thing that they do is they got me interested. If I hadn't had the hands-on classes, I would have just gone nowhere. You know, use the hands-on classes to teach math, to teach reading. You know, right now at home, we have a shortage of diesel mechanics. There's a good number of people on the spectrum. They make an excellent diesel mechanic. And they're not going to get laid off. We've got a shortage. Our trucking industry is screaming. Now, how do I understand something abstract? I had to learn the Lord's Prayer, and I had no idea what it meant. When I was 5 years old, I learned it. And the only part that made any sense to me was the power and the glory. And this is my picture for the power and the glory. You got a rainbow with an electrical tower at the base of the rainbow. That's the power and the glory. All my thinking uses specific examples to create concepts. It's bottom up, not top down. This is another really important slide. Everything is learned by specific examples. This is why you got to get kids out and you got to show them interesting stuff. You got to get them out in lots of different places doing stuff because you got to fill up the database. I didn't think my mind got good until I got about 45 years old. So you read. See, I got to give those parietal bushes something to search. And when search engines were first invented on computers, I go, oh, wow, this works just like how my mind works. Some people hate the way search engines work. I love the way they work. I just make up all the different keywords and I just put them in there and I find stuff on the internet. But think about the kid's head as being sort of a big database. You got to fill up, because to understand something in the future, he's got to relate it back to something in the past. You see, it's associative thinking. It's bottom up, it's not top down. And this is just the opposite to how you think. Play games with categorizing things. Okay, you might say, well, pick out the red objects. But then have the child make up new categories, like rectangular objects, objects used in the office, objects that contain plastic, objects you wear. You know, and then the thing is, an object can be in more than one category. Okay, the ball is red. It's also something that you'd use for play. And there's a lot of good apps on the iPad, but I saw an app that I thought was really bad. It was very cute, but it was really bad. It was on, you know, it had the Dr. Seuss kind of a theme, and it showed a house. So if you touched the ball, it said ball. But when I touched a picture of the bike, it said play. That's going to be totally confusing to an autistic kid. No, you touch the bike, it needs to say bike or bicycle, not play. Now, the autistic mind is into details. Details is where the autistic mind is at. And autistic people will pick out the little details quicker than they're going to pick out the big letters. Is autistic learning just memorization and scripting? In the beginning, it is. People used to call me tape recorder. I was teased in high school, and I was called tape recorder, and I couldn't figure out why, because I always used the same phrases. But then as I got older and I got more and more information loaded on a database, then I can recombine things different ways, and it's less scripted. Teach number concept with a variety of objects. They got to learn you can have 2 clocks, you can have 2 computers, 2 people, 2 cars, 2 office buildings, 2 paper clips. That numbers apply to many, many different kinds of things. Teach adding and subtraction. Cooking is a great way to teach math. You know, you can have half a glass of water, a full glass of water, you know, measuring. Teach fractions by cutting up fruit, cutting up pizzas. See, that makes math real. Now, in looking at the meaning of language, you know, some speech people try to teach a kid all the connector words like this and is and the. Those don't mean anything. They don't mean anything. No. First thing you want to do is you want to teach nouns. You know, like in the teach program, you know, decorate the whole room with all the nouns. Okay, but now once they learn the nouns, then let's look at the other words that are really important. Words like stop and go. Those are really important. Words like down, up, on. See, if I say put the book on the table, that means the same thing as book on table. See, when it comes to meaning, I just need book on table. But they got to learn you can walk down the stairs. The plane comes down and lands. You put a cup down. You lie down on a bed. See, for each one of these kind of position words, you got to give a lot of different examples. Now, there was another brain scan that was done that showed that I'd much rather look at pictures of things than pictures of people. But we need to have some people in this world that are interested in things, because Tesla, who invented the power plant, would be labeled autistic today. You wouldn't have any electric lights otherwise. I got social interaction through shared interests. The only place where I was not teased was horseback riding, model rocket club, and electronics. You gotta get kids involved with these shared things. We gotta get them out doing this stuff. I talked to a mom recently. Her daughter wanted to do a junior student livestock rabbit project. And the mother was afraid to sign her up for that. I said, get over it. You're going to have a rabbit in your backyard. You sign your daughter up for that right now. These are just the sort of things you need to be getting your kids involved in. We've got to start thinking a lot more about outcomes and things like the work skills. I'm seeing smart Aspergers graduating from college. They haven't done one work skill. They've never delivered a newspaper. They've never walked a dog. They've never mowed a lawn. They've never sold a greeting card. They've never worked on somebody else's garden. They haven't done any work things. You know, things like scouting is good. We have junior ag programs at home. Those are really good. Hobbies, different hobby clubs. How about garden clubs? Gardening's really big here. That would be a good thing to get some of these guys involved in. You need to get them involved with shared interests that they can do with other people. Now, when you have a behavior problem, you got to categorize it. Is it biology or is it behavioral? And one of the big causes of a lot of tantrums and meltdowns is sensory oversensitivity. Screaming in Tesco's or at the train station because it's just sensory overload. Or maybe they've got a hidden painful medical problem. You know, a nonverbal person might have acid reflux or an earache or a toothache. Now, I got very frustrated because I couldn't communicate. You know, if you got a behavior problem, yeah, frustration, not being able to communicate. Other times I threw a big, huge temper tantrum just to get out of doing stuff. Or you do it to get attention. We had a rule in my house. You had a temper tantrum, mother would wait for me to calm down, and then she would just say, well, there'll be no television tonight. That was the rule. No matter what the cause of a temper tantrum was, there was no television that night. And when I was older and I got in some fist fights in our cafeteria, I had horseback riding taken away for 2 weeks, and I got over fighting. I switched to crying. And you know what? It's okay for geeks to cry. When the space shuttle was shut down, NASA space scientists were crying on national television. That's one of the reasons why they kept those jobs. Now, there's some things we're going to have to accommodate. There are some individuals where the fire alarm is just too much. Some are not going to be able to tolerate the supermarket. I can't tolerate scratchy clothes. You're not getting wool against my skin. Some handwriting can be a big problem. You know, let them type. Fluorescent lights. And the other thing is, another thing that all levels of the spectrum can have problems with is multitasking. Cannot multitask. There's a lot of entry-level jobs I'd have a very difficult time doing. I also cannot remember long strings of verbal directions. That's because I got no working memory. I got to write it down. The thing that's really weird is there's all kinds of high-level jobs where you don't need working memory. You know, it's accessing all the databases back here. That makes me really good at troubleshooting problems at meat plants. This is where a 50s upbringing helped me. Turn-taking with board games. Learning turn-taking. Learning to be on time. Doing activities I disliked. I had to sit through church whether I liked it or not. And you had learning how to do things that the other people want you to do. Saying please and thank you. And when a social mistake was made, they didn't scream no. Mother just quietly gave the correction. Like, for example, if I reached across the table to get the peas, well, you know, at the dinner table, she'd say, ask your sister to pass it. You know, you know, you give the instruction. If the child's touching too much merchandise in the store, you say you can only touch the things you're going to buy. You give the instruction instead of screaming no. Well, here's bad behavior that just simply wasn't tolerated. And I think there's a lot of kids getting a lot of labels today. They don't need all these labels because they didn't have a 50s upbringing. And there's some kids getting some labels where I would just label them as brats. You know, if the child's having a temper tantrum and a meltdown in the middle of the train station, that's probably sensory. You don't punish sensory problems because that's biology. You know, bad table manners. Well, that wasn't tolerated in the 50s. The other thing is there was very consistent discipline between home and school. Mother and the teacher worked together. And if I had a temper tantrum at school, the teacher called home, and then there was no TV that night. There was no way I could manipulate mom against the school. Everyone was working together. You know, laughing at a fat lady, swearing, being a slob. These are all things that, you know, it's okay to be eccentric, but you just can't be a rude, filthy pig. And we gotta teach social skills out in the community. You know, Mother had dinner parties, and I'd have to put on my little Sunday school dress and serve hors d'oeuvres and shake hands with the guests. You know what? That was very, very good training. Learn how to talk appropriately to the guests. By the time I was 7 or 8 years old, I knew how to order food in restaurants. I knew how to shop. I'm seeing kids a lot less severe than me that don't know how to do these basic things. And one of the reasons they don't know how to do it is they weren't taught them. And you can't teach these things in a fake store or a fake restaurant in a school. You got to take them out to the real McDonald's and do it. You got to take them to the real Tesco's and do it. And we need to be taking kids when they're 7 and 8 years old. Let's take them into the supermarket and explain, do comparison shopping and budgeting and get little kids to help you with that stuff. See, again, that's getting back to independent living when they grow up. The other problem that kids have today, all kids have today, is there's less unstructured play. You know, when I was a child, 4 kids would get together and decide how to build a sandcastle or decide how to build a tree house or a fort. And you had to negotiate, and you didn't always get your own way. And when you grow up, that's called work rules. Being eccentric's okay, but being filthy, dirty, and rude is not okay. And one of my favorite shows is Big Bang Theory, because Sheldon and his friends there, they're pure Asperger. It's okay for geeks to cry. Okay, this is a rule system I still live with. When I was in high school, I took all of society's rules and I put them into 4 categories. If you want to have a civilized society, you can't have people robbing banks, wrecking buildings, stealing everything, and killing each other. So you don't have any reason to do really bad things like that. Then the courtesy rules. They help people get along. Then I got to have some places to break some rules, especially stupid school rules that I got to take algebra before I take geometry. That's like stupid. And then you got the sins of the system. Let's take drug offenses. In some countries, drug offenses have the death penalty. In other countries, there'd be a death penalty in one place would be legal somewhere else. That's why I call it a sin of the system, because it's very variable depending upon which country you're in. And you better find out what the sins of the system are where you're living, because they get you in 10 zillion tons of trouble. You don't touch those things. Okay, here are some examples of hidden painful medical problems. You can get nonverbal individuals, acid reflux, heartburn, that's your biggie. Why don't you try treating it with some heartburn medicine? And if you see this sort of behavior, we're kind of stretching like this, that's probably heartburn. How about constipation? Urinary tract infections, yeast infections, they make you real miserable. Ear infections, bad tooth. You got to rule these things out. If you have somebody that's been nonverbal, that's been good, and now all of a sudden his behavior is just atrocious, instead of going out and getting 10 tons of drugs, the first thing you better do is rule out a hidden painful medical problem. You've got to rule that out. There's my squeezing machine. And the reason why I made the squeezing machine is it helped to calm down my anxiety attacks. When I got into puberty, I was constant, nonstop panic attacks. And in the HBO movie, I was eating all this yogurt all the time because everything went through me. I had colitis super bad. And then when I got into my early 30s, I went on antidepressant medication, and that stopped the panic attacks. Remember, my fear system is 3 times bigger. Now, but I want to emphasize this is not true for everybody with autism. It's only true for some of them. You know, not everybody with autism is a gigantic anxiety monster. I was. But I watched cattle going in a squeeze chute, and I found that the pressure sometimes relaxed the cattle, so I wanted to try out this cattle chute. And by using the pressure, that helped to calm me down. Another thing that helped me calm me down was lots of exercise. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of getting lots and lots of exercise. Exercise calms down the nervous system. Really important thing. Now there's a therapist doing a sensory activity with pressure. You know, try some of your speech therapy or maybe some of your behavior therapy while you're doing a sensory activity like deep pressure. Because remember how I talked about the hearing could be like a bad mobile phone? You need a car and you're going up and down the hills and your phone is sort of fading in and out. And you do this pressure that can sometimes stabilize the hearing. It's sort of like taking the phone outside for a better signal. You know, some individuals this is going to work, some it won't. See, the problem with the sensory things, under the autism umbrella, they're very variable. Some kids respond to deep pressure and others don't. Remember, light tickle touches are bad. Ugh. Deep pressure's calming. I think it's also really important to get little kids to enjoy the feeling of being hugged, because I think that helps you to have feelings of kindness. And desensitizing to the deep pressure, that's easier than dealing with the fluorescent light sensitivity problem. That's much more, that I think in some individuals cannot be desensitized. Sound sensitivity sometimes can be. Here's an occupational therapist doing sensory with swinging, slow swinging. And some children will start to speak when you just do slow swinging. I've had 4 or 5 parents tell me that their child did their first words riding a horse. And I think one of the reasons why that happens is because you got rhythm and balancing happening right at the same time. And there's a child wearing a weighted vest. Again, this works for some and not for others. You know, and then when you look it up on PubMed, you find papers that say it doesn't work. But I've seen it work on some kids. But the thing is, it works on a subgroup. The other mistake that's made with weighted vests is leaving them on too long. All of these sensory things, the maximum effect is 20 minutes, and then you've got to get it off for a while. Already talked about the importance of the feelings of kindness. We got to start working on preparing individuals for employment. Teenagers need to have jobs outside the home. 8-year-olds need to be doing chores in the home. That needs to start at an early age. We're just like, you know, being too soft on a lot of these kids. And what are good jobs for teenagers? Oh, things like walking dogs, tending gardens, stuff like that, mowing lawns. One of the big things that really helped me was my science teacher. He was just fabulous. Because I was kind of, you know, a bored student in school. I didn't care about studying. He got me interested in studying because now I had the goal of becoming a scientist. And if I wanted to become a scientist, then I was going to have to study stuff I was bored with, like English and history. Now, when I was in high school, I didn't do very much studying, but boy, I did a lot of working. I took care of the horse barn and cleaned the stalls every day. I made signs. I did carpentry work. I shingled the barn roof. Did a lot of work things. You got to take kids out and have them visit interesting workplaces. You don't show them interesting stuff, then they don't know that interesting stuff exists. Bring in trade journals from all kinds of different businesses. And I already discussed about making a portfolio to sell your work, not yourself. You know, as us visual thinkers, we can show off our art. And you know what? You can put it on your phone. But don't put junk in your portfolio. Just put your good stuff in there. But you should have your portfolio on your phone. Well, I redecorated our ski-tail house, and I took an ugly plywood shed, and I made it really attractive. But I did it in a way that other people would appreciate. See, this gets into the whole thing of learning how to do tasks other people are going to want. Then this needs to start early. We need to be getting a lot more outcome-based on what's going to happen to this kid when he leaves his special school or he graduates from high school or even from college. And I didn't realize until I was in my 40s just how important the work experience I had in high school was. You know, if I hadn't done the work experience in high school, I probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. Okay, jobs for middle school. Middle school in America is age 13, 14 years old. I think even younger kids can do some of these jobs, walking the neighbor's dog. How about fixing computers for local businesses? And you go around and you update the virus programs, making PowerPoint presentations for people, selling artwork and crafts, working on a neighborhood or church website, working in a farmer's market, working tending other people's gardens. You know, even 5th and 6th graders could be doing some of these jobs. They got to start learning how to do things like this outside the home. That's what they need to do. Get teenagers involved in things like, you know, robotics classes and robotics clubs. And the thing I like about these is that robot has to do an assigned task. They got to learn how to build something that somebody else wants. Also, they need to do this in teams, like you have 2 people on a team. One person makes a computer, and the other person, or rather programs the computer, and the other person builds the mechanical parts. Because when you get into a job situation, you're going to have to work in work teams. I always like to show my drawings off. This one seems to show up a little bit better. I think there's some computer compatibility issues here. And there's one of my drawings done in Google SketchUp. You know, SketchUp, you can get it free on the internet. Really cool 3D drawing program. There's a lot of fantastic stuff you get on the internet for individuals to do. A kid needs to get self-esteem by accomplishment. I wasn't praised for every little tiny thing that I did. I was praised when I did some artwork that was really special. How about educational resources? There's all kinds of stuff online now. All right, these are things that you can access on the internet from here. I hope the handout's got that on there. Khan Academy, free videos, mainly math and science. Khan Academy. Udacity, free programming courses. There's another one called Code Academy. How about free courses at Stanford and MIT? You can just type that into Google. Free courses at Stanford and MIT. Open Courseware Consortium, Mathematica. There's all kinds of free, especially programming and mathematics stuff that's free online. Well, you need to get them doing this stuff. But somebody's got to introduce it. Kids just muck about. Unless there's some mentoring to introduce them and you sort of make sure they do it, you know, it's sort of, someone's got to light the spark. That's really important. Well, I had a science teacher that showed me the optical illusion room, and the movie showed exactly how I built the optical illusion room. That's an example of showing students interesting things. Then I got fixated on it, but that became part of my basis of studying science. And my knowledge of optical illusions helped me in my work with cattle. Because the first work I ever did with cattle is I noticed they were scared of a lot of little things we didn't notice, like shadows and reflections. And there's the HBO movie team. And there were a lot of old Aspergers on that movie site. And I've got a book out there called Different Not Less. And it's about 14 people labeled autism, Asperger's, or ADHD. And they got their diagnosis later in life. And the jobs that they've had have ranged from store clerk to computer people, to veterinarians, to doctors, and they're all employed. You know, where are all the old people with Asperger's? I'll tell you where they're at. They're all employed. And one of the reasons why they're changing the diagnosis in the States is they're saying, well, not everybody's just a little quirky and different to get a label. You know, there's some politics. I'd say maybe the change in the label in the US is half politics and half science. And there's the place where I started my career in the meat industry. You got to find the back door for getting into jobs. I never got a single job through the front door interviewing stuff. That never worked out for me. And the way I got into that plant was I was wearing that shirt that's now in the Cowgirl Hall of Fame, and I hand embroidered that shirt. I was wearing my portfolio. I was wearing my portfolio and I didn't realize I was wearing it. See, people respect talent and ability. Okay, what I think we'll do, I've got slides here for jobs, for different kinds of jobs. I think I'll save those for this afternoon. And this afternoon I'm going to talk about the jobs of visual thinkers, jobs for math thinkers, jobs for verbal thinkers, and I'm also going to be talking about medication issues, which is, I take medication, so antidepressant medication, it saved me. It stopped the terrible panic attacks. I'll talk more about that this afternoon. And we got time for one really quick little question, because they wanted to keep me exactly to an hour. Okay, right there, really quick. How old was I when I went on antidepressants? I was in my early 30s. And us visual thinkers, and I've seen this with non-autistic visual thinkers too, that are in the things like graphic design, as I went through my 20s, My anxiety got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. I was being destroyed by stress-related health problems. And then when I took the antidepressants, that stopped. That's why I have a chapter in Thinking in Pictures called A Believer in Biochemistry. And the one place where medication can really make a difference, especially in some of the higher functioning individuals, is that taking antidepressants for controlling anxiety. And you need to take them in low doses, because if you get too big a dose, you're going to get agitation and insomnia. The trick is really low doses. The mistake that's made lots of times is taking doses way too high, and then it's just awful. And I think we can go for a break now, and I'll talk about jobs and medication this afternoon.